Welcome. It's going to be great to have you with us this weekend. We're looking at the Good Shepherd and being a disciple and being the best we can do to help other people and have an abundant life. So join us just a few moments. Stick with us. Welcome to the fourth Sunday after Easter, sometimes called Good Shepherd Sunday. It is frequently a phrase that is used, Jesus the Good Shepherd. I think most of us would have a pretty good understanding about what a Good Shepherd is. Of course, there are some significant differences between a shepherd of the first century and a shepherd of the modern era in the 21st century. And here in Australia, the average sized flock of sheep would be approximately 4,000 or 5,000. The large flocks, however, on broad acre farming, I think they're up to about 40,000 head of sheep. That's a lot of sheep. Now, just a little bit different from the small flock of sheep, which was mentioned in today's gospel reading from John chapter 10. The reference here is to a small number of sheep, probably a little flock of about maybe 50. Where the shepherd gives names to all of the sheep, and when he is able, at the end of the evening or end of the day towards evening, he calls each of the sheep by name, and the sheep know the shepherd's voice. They would obey the shepherd. I read somewhere that there are about 500 times a reference of the term sheep in the Bible. Sheep are used throughout the Bible to symbolically refer to God's people. The shepherd, of course, is a reference to God, and in today's context, it is to Jesus. The focus in today's gospel story is on the relationship between the good shepherd and the sheep. The shepherd knows the sheep, and the sheep know the shepherd. They know each other's voice. I'm sure that you've had that experience when somebody's been phoning you, you've picked up the phone, answered the phone, and even before they say who they are, you know who they are from the first few words that they've said because you know their voice. I know that's the same with myself and Jane, my wife. She can phone me and I know who it is. She doesn't need to introduce herself. I know who it is immediately. And I'm sure we've had other incidences like that. Maybe it's with good friends or family. A similar thing happens when my father's on the phone. I know it's my father immediately. We've all had that experience where we know the voice on the other end of the line. But this can only be achieved when we get to know somebody, when we really know the other person's voice. This was something that was practiced in Jesus' day. As evening fell, the shepherd would call the sheep into the sheepfold to protect them from the wild animals during the night. Being faithful, following the shepherd, well, it requires commitment. As I was preparing for today's sermon, I was contemplating if there is a place for commitment in this modern world. What do you think? We live in a Western consumer-driven society. Admittedly, some of those consumer urges have been restricted due to this pandemic lockdown, but a large part of the consumer mentality is if there is something better, well, go to that. If there is something shiny and new, just been released, drop what you have and go and get the new thing. Now, I'm not against capitalism and consumerism. Well, not totally. If I was, then I'd be a hypocrite. I like a new toy as much as anyone. But I want to know, do the ideas of consumerism and commitment, do they sit well together? I suppose in my mind, commitment is akin to the idea of loyalty. I have to confess that I have a blind spot when it comes to loyalty. Maybe it's a hangover from my army days, but I'm a bit like a loyal puppy dog. My personal bias is skewed towards commitment and loyalty, so I can't really answer the question that I'm posing to you. Do consumerism and commitment go together? I'd love to know what you think. Maybe you could help me. If you want to leave a message at the end of the sermon, I'd love to hear your comments on this. Do consumerism and commitment, well, do they sit well together? Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, who is committed to looking after the sheep. But he mixes up a metaphor here. He calls himself the Good Shepherd, but then he also calls himself the gate. Back in Jesus' day, a shepherd with a small flock of sheep would frequently stay in a walled sheepfold at night time. This was our way to protect from the animals. And so you have this idea of a sheepfold, and there's one door, one gate into the sheepfold and one way out. And the shepherd would sleep in the gate to allow the sheep in and out, and also to protect the sheep from nasty animals who might want to come, and also maybe other shepherds who might want to steal some jumbucks and put them in their tucker bag. Jesus' own claim to be this door promises not only salvation to those who go through him, but also spiritual sustenance. He says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture." Like the term sheep, the word pasture also is frequently mentioned throughout the Bible. Pasture is in the internal sense, denotes that which sustains a person's spiritual life. So here Jesus is saying, if you live your life through me, i.e., do what I do and become my disciple, you will find spiritual sustenance. The next verse actually defines what this spiritual sustenance looks like. And of course, many of us know it is abundant life. I've talked about abundant life over the last few weeks, and I've given some ideas about what it might be, but I'd love to know also what you think it is. We've all got opinions, so what is your opinion about abundant life, particularly abundant life as Jesus mentions it? What does it look like to you? The word abundant in Greek is perission, meaning exceedingly or excessive or beyond measure. A quantity so abundant as to be considered more than what one could expect or anticipate. In short, Jesus promises us a life far better than we could ever imagine, a concept reminiscent of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. And I quote, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him." Before we begin to have visions of McMansions and Maserati cars and super yachts and more money than you could shake a stick at, we need to pause and think for a moment about what Jesus teaches regarding this sort of abundant life. The Bible tells us that wealth and prestige, position and power in this world are not really God's priorities for us. Abundant life does not consist in the abundance of material things. And I don't think God is against that, but God isn't necessarily saying, well, abundant life equals all these possessions. Jesus never says that. If this was really the case, Jesus would have been indeed the wealthiest man walking about in his time. And just the opposite is the case. Now, if we dig a little deeper, we see that abundance for Jesus has a specific tone, a tone which is particularly difficult for people in today's world to hear. Jesus is explicitly concerned with the welfare of the vulnerable. He launches his public ministry by giving us his personal mission statement, and it's in Luke, but also Jesus, when he stands up, is quoting from the old prophet Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of the sight for those who are blind, to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Jesus is also concerned with our own spiritual growth and well-being. He calls us to be followers in his way of living in the world. We frequently call this discipleship. Now, we need to be clear about what discipleship is. A disciple is a person who has decided that the most important thing in their life is to learn how to do what Jesus did, to put it into practice in their own lives. A disciple is not a person who has things all under control, who has things sorted out, or even knows all wealth of information. Disciples simply are people who are constantly reviewing their affairs to carry through on their decision to follow Jesus. Jesus teaches his followers to help others, particularly the vulnerable and the marginalized. Helping others and giving your time, your money, and your energy just doesn't make the world a better place, it also makes you better. Scientific studies are now showing that the very act of giving back to the community boosts your happiness and your health and your sense of well-being. A significant part of spiritual maturity is helping others, which in turn helps us. It gives us abundant life. By helping the poor, the outcast, and the vulnerable, science is now confirming that it increases our own quality of life by making us happier. It makes us live longer. It helps us even with chronic pain and blood pressure, and also gives us a sense of purpose and satisfaction. Many of us have experienced the ministry of Jesus to our hearts, sometimes which are broken. And his followers, we are to do the same as Jesus did, and that's to bind up the brokenhearted, anointed and filled with that very same Spirit that filled Jesus. We are to follow in his footsteps and do what he did. Proclaim the gospel to the poor, freedom to the captives, as well as to bind up those who are crushed in heart. We are to help them put their hearts back together, wrapping them back up with love so that they may heal. Physical blessings may or may not be part of a God-centered life, but being a blessing to someone else is a sure indication of spiritual maturity. Finally, a Christian's life revolves around growing in grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ. This teaches us that the abundant life is a continual process of learning, of practicing, of maturing, as well as failing, of recovering, of making adjustments, of enduring, and indeed overcoming. But it all starts with putting our faith into practice. One small act of kindness followed by another and another and another. On this Shepherd Sunday, we are encouraged to follow Jesus, who is the Good Shepherd. The Christian faith is not a passive faith. It is active. It requires of us a commitment to follow in the ways and teachings of Jesus. In following the Good Shepherd, we will find good pastures of abundant life, enough for all to be blessed. I pray, my friends, that this week you will be blessed, but indeed you will be a great blessing to others as well. I would encourage you maybe this week to write down some of the blessings that you feel as though God's blessed you with and how you might be able to share those with others. Thank you for joining us today, and I pray that you may have a wonderful week. God bless. Bye. Thank you for joining us today. It's great that you were able to tune in, and I encourage you to maybe subscribe at the bottom of the channel here. Maybe write some comments at the bottom as well. It's always good to hear what you have to say. I encourage others to tune in on Sunday mornings as well. It's been great that you've been able to tune in the last few, I think it's 6 weeks now. And it's just been such a great blessing to know that people are meeting together on Sunday morning, worshipping together. It's a great sense of coming together as well. Even though we might not be together individually or at a church, we're here in each other's homes, celebrating God, and indeed we're still part of this wonderful community that God calls us into. So have a great week, everyone, and I look forward to hearing your comments and to seeing you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.